Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Okay, so I am actually going to share my screen and focus on our room here. So bear with me. Can you all see our Clackamas room? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, great. Okay, so just in general, what did you hear? What reinforced what you already think? Did you hear anything new? What is missing from the community input that we've had? Anyone? I'm going to open the chat. You can put it in the chat, or please, by all means, open up your mic and let us know. What do you think you heard either at the focus groups or the open house?
I'm raising my hand. I'm just remembering the first comment about that this process doesn't involve, Southeast, capital S, capital E, all schools in the discussion, and how a bunch of schools that could be used as representative data or voices that we haven't heard or whatever, or stuff like that. It seems like the first couple comments were also reflecting that from the community. So that's something that sort of we already thought, or I think about a lot. And the first of voted questions were about that. So that particular topic was something that we already thought. Anything new? I'll try and answer all three real quick. Anything new? I don't know. What's missing? Probably public access to key data points, but that's probably hard to spread those dashboards so thin and have a bazillion people trying to crunch data at the same time, which is why we have this coalition. So, but those are my thoughts initially. Thank you.
Anyone else? What did you hear?
I feel like I didn't hear all that much new information. I heard a lot of this, I think we're continuing to hear from families that this is some major disruption to school communities and a real desire to maintain some sense of school community. I think that's a general theme I keep hearing, right? That not just we don't want to change, which I think is still a theme too. I think a lot of that it is a lot about disruption, right? That the struggle and disruption to the school community is hard, and especially in the midst of a pandemic or coming out of a pandemic or still surviving through a pandemic, that disruption feels challenging to cope with and manage.
Thanks, Harmony. Anyone else? Or some other things you took away? About you, I see a hand. Oh, Sam, you got your hand again. Let's see if somebody else wants to share. I hear you. I appreciate you putting your hand up. Anyone else want to share? Maybe Chris, is there anything you heard? Or Dee, got your hand up.
I thought it was interesting as we sort of it feels like round two of kind of similar things. It's like here's proposals and here's feedback. And it did feel like there was a little bit of evolution in round two about people's sentiments around I think I agree with Harmony. It was a lot of we don't want change, but I felt like the articulation around why people don't want change felt a little more clear, I guess. I think a lot of it is just that it's the disruption of current sort of things. But also, I think the loss of community seemed to be a theme that I heard a lot of. Is just the idea that it feels like if there's scattering of programs, that you lose sort of program integrity and program like history and community. It takes time to build things in certain locations, and I think people are really like, you know, for good reason, mourning the potential loss of these like communities and structures and relationships that they've built. And so I thought it was sort of interesting, like it felt like to me there was less noise about location this time. I felt like in the first round it was this shocking, like, oh my God, like why, how can you go here and how can you go here? Like it was just hard for people to process like the different locations. It feels like now we're really like, as a community, more comfortable with where all the schools are. I mean, to be honest, I could say that I didn't know where Marysville was exactly, and I didn't know where Creston was exactly. And so it feels like, I don't know, sorry, it's a little long-winded, but it feels like the feedback was a little bit more specific and felt like it was more specific to community loss as opposed to just change of location.
Okay. So a better understanding of kind of where those locations are.
Yeah, it felt like the move and the inconvenience of the move to me felt like a really strong theme in the first round of feedback last year. And this time it felt a little bit more like specific to loss of community. You know, I think people had a year to sort of grapple with the idea of, oh, we might go there. And so now it's just sort of like, okay, well, if there's change, how does that affect our community? And a little bit, it felt like less personal, like this is how it impacts me. So it was nice to see a little bit more like general feedback rather than just like, my kid's a second grader, and if the boundary is on 72nd instead of 71st, like, you know, so specific last year, and now it feels a little bit broader.
Thanks, Dee. Anyone else hasn't had a chance to speak tonight? Want to bring voice into the room relative to what you're hearing? Anything missing?
Excuse me, Karina.
Yes.
Something I don't think we had the opportunity to do this before, but we actually have someone new with us this evening who has volunteered to be a part of the coalition as a community partner, and that's Lisa Jackson. And if y'all haven't met Lisa yet, I wonder if this is a good moment to give her a chance to introduce herself.
Sure.
Lisa, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello,
My name is Lisa Jackson. I'm Dakota Sioux. I'm new to Portland as well. I'm not fairly new, but I've moved here 2 years ago. But I was involved in a bad accident to where I lost one of my limbs. So I took a year off, and now I'm with NAIA. I came here to start with NAIA, and now I'm back at NAIA. And so I'm a youth advocate. Prior to coming here, I worked with Native Pathways and Native American Bridge program for high school students, preparing them for college. And now I'm working with the younger. And so I'm excited to be here. And I'm just jumping into this. I'm actually been with NAIA for a few weeks, so I'm excited to be a part of the coalition and learn the community here.
Oh, thank you. Welcome to both Portland and to NAIA. So
Yes,
and to the Southeast Guiding Coalition.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, I think you were opening your mic. Oh, maybe not. Okay, she says hold.
Sorry,
No worries.
just trying to get everything right. So I did not, I don't feel like I didn't feel like I saw a lot of new things. I thought, and I didn't catch the nuance of tone that some other people that have had a longer experience. I did see that the more people were like, the people who were more likely to go be boundary changed into a school they felt was lower ranked, or that they had some fears and hesitations about, those people sounded angry and afraid to me. So that's what I noticed.
Okay. I'm going to say fears, anger, and hesitation. Okay. Anyone else want to bring their voice in the room? Oscar.
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned it too, that I think that people are a little bit more accepting of change and trying to lay out what the future holds. And I think for me personally, just the feeder pattern, right? Like, how do we get from elementary to middle school, and being realistic about that as to like how to staff that potential new school or keep it at Kellogg. And also too, I think just there's this feeling, I hosted a dual immersion presentation for Spanish speaking families, and they definitely talked about just this feeling of being let down with being pulled from Kellogg. People definitely really feel like they were told they were going to be there, or like they set it up. They did all this strategic planning to get it to a place where it is now, and to get it ripped from under them just really felt disrespectful to some people, and also to me, but so I think that was a big feedback as to like moving forward, what that looks like.
Thank you, Oscar. Anyone else? All right, Dee, I see your hand up, but want to see if anyone else hasn't had. Sandra, who else hasn't had a chance to speak? I'm not going to force you, but wanted to be sure everyone has an opportunity.
I'm good right now, thank you.
Okay. All right. Dee, I know you and Sam both wanted to bring something new into the room, so go ahead.
If we're moving on to what was missing from the overall conversation, we had a community meeting before the other community meeting, and we had probably 113 families, which was pretty crazy. It's taken us a year to get that much that was probably 95% of our school community, including native speakers. And the format that we chose was, luckily, we have a coalition member now who's a native speaker. So we split up into a neighborhood room, a native speaking room, and a non-native DLI room. And it was just really productive to hear everybody's voices when they had a chance to talk, like not part of the greater community. So people could say things like that were honest without feeling like they were going to offend somebody, and had a chance to really lean into what made the most sense to their community and what their struggles were. And so I feel like what I feel like has been missing a little bit, and I think the co-chairs touched on it a little bit, is just this idea of we're polite, sort of like respectful people as a whole on the coalition, I think in Portland in general, and the idea that people are hesitant to voice an opinion that is sort of not popular. And we heard some things that were really surprising to me now that we've sort of captured like a larger portion of our community, and it wasn't sort of what we thought up until now was what everybody wanted, because there's always sort of people that say what they think, and they're sort of loud and consistent. And so I feel like from the process, that I feel like is really missing. I took a minute to go on to like the Southeast Guiding Coalition Facebook page, which I hadn't done before. And I was reading through some of the comments from the Arleta neighborhood and from the Woodstock neighborhood, and a lot of people were on there just saying that they felt really uncomfortable like expressing concerns because it felt like it was disrespectful to other communities within their school. And so I feel like this process is missing a little bit of that sort of like whole community, like honest discussion. And I don't know how you introduce that, but that was just an observation.
I'm trying to figure out how to capture that as a note, Dee, because I do think that there is something missing there, right? That it is maybe, there's the hesitancy to voice unpopular opinions, but maybe too much politeness.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right way of thinking of it.
I think like there's some dominant narratives that it's easy because they make sense, and they're frequent. And so it was really helpful, at least for our community, to hear some other like narratives from people who've been less engaged, like that hadn't been engaged with the process. And I felt like it was really important for us to like hear and respect those opinions for people that hadn't been sifting through the data for 2 years and like they were just coming at it with this honest, like, okay, like help me understand where we are. I'm new, but I know something's changing. And it just, I don't know. Yeah, I think maybe just in general is like greater capture. Like we've been asking for more community input. And I think the boat so far has really been driven by some sort of like very I'm not like saying that in an accusing way. I would say the same thing has happened at Bridger. There's been like a few folks who have an idea of what they want, and it's like we've been hearing that. So it's nice to hear something different. Sorry, Sam.
Thank you. Sam, it's all you. You're on mute. Yeah, I see the hand. It's yeah.
Sorry, just clock pressure.
I saw it ticking.
Ooh, thanks, man.
Okay.
Fast enough.
I know. My goodness, that was a lot going on there. Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Sam. All right, my friend, go.
Okay, so I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit and say that, and I mean this in the nicest way, is that like I do feel that this process has been balkanized, for lack of a better term, extremely from PPS to the communities, essentially to like go find your voice. And it's messy and it's hard. And I feel like what's missing is like the voice of PPS. Like at what point do we hear what they think about anything? Essentially, everyone's asking questions. We've got questions from them, questions from us, questions from everybody. Nobody's like saying what things are. And so like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, what's missing is PPS's advocacy for their own programs. If they care about my program, then there should be a little bit more like matter of fact advocacy for the existence of it, besides just like questions back and forth. And so we're all coming to our community voices now. It's taken us a bazillion years, and all the way through this process, that's almost over. But like at what point do we start to hear from a less balkanized process about the investment, that they have in these programs of all various kinds and stuff like that. And so that would be nice to start hearing with all of our disparate community voices that are, essentially by design in this process in literature, powerless, but nice to hear. So it'd be nice to hear the powerful voices too. I feel like that's missing a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. All right, Sandra.
Yeah, sorry guys.
No worries.
So kind of spinning off, I guess, what Dee said, and I don't really want to go into the Facebook page because it's its own thing. But as far as what's missing, I think part of what's missing are positives. I think people are coming from, coming from a place of passion, or in some cases a feeling of desperation or fear or anger. And so there's a hyper focus on what we don't like about things. And I know like in my school community, from the very first time I met with the PTA, I said, okay, guys, I know that the overarching message here is that you don't like this proposal, but one way or another, our communities are all going to experience change. And we need to look at these from a perspective of, how will this work? How can we make it work? Or what things can be changed that would make this more appealing to us? What aspects of these plans do we like? And I know that just from like my outreach and even speaking like, privately with people who have, feel like they have or do have an unpopular opinion, trying to glean that kind of information has been extremely difficult. Judy just asked if recording's back on.
Recording is on. We're good.
So I think that kind of a thing is missing, and that's a huge component of this process, because when we come to the table and we're trying to figure things out for our proposals that work, we need to know what people don't hate.
Right. Yeah, and we're going to start to get an idea of that tonight, I believe. Okay, Richard.
So echo what Oscar was saying a little bit earlier. Just the feedback I'm hearing is, again, I'm the Kellogg principal, but the fact that the school opened up recently, those communities went through upheaval to open this new school, and now the community is most vocal really around the program change, about taking away the Spanish immersion. And I just want to give voice to those parents who have expressed that to me through email, through surveys, and in person and in meetings.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else, either a community listening or anything that's missing? Sounds like there wasn't really a lot new, but is there anything that surprised you or that that maybe didn't reinforce what you were already thinking? Adrielle.
Regarding what's missing, I think one of the things that I hear a lot are, like Sandra said, the complaints, and people are really polarized sometimes about their community and what they don't want to change and things like that. But I'm not hearing the solutions. Like, okay, this would help if even though I don't like this, if we put this here or we do this thing, that would help us feel a little bit better about it. Because I think potentially we haven't done as good of a job as we could to express that these are all very fluid and all the solutions are malleable. But still, I don't feel like there's a lot, or there hasn't yet been a lot of throwing solutions at the problem, right? And I'm eager for us to get to that. Because I think that some of the solutions we come up with will help us feel better about what's going on, but it'll also help calm some of the anxiety of the voices that are not coming to the table, right? Like people who are here because they don't believe this is gonna be of any value to them. When we start coming up with solutions, that might bring people more comfort.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and put your comment in the chat, Dee. And yes, I can go ahead and for those of you that want the link to the mural board, I'm gonna go ahead and plop that into Spaces. Okay. And again, we're hopefully folks are engaging in the conversation, right? Because I think one of the things that was disruptive last time was kind of a lot of chat happening and a lot of discussion happening. So far, I think we've been doing a pretty good job of that. Anyone else? Something new? Okay, so it would be good to start to see if there are key themes that are coming up from what we're seeing, right? So wanting more data, the voice of PPS, that thing feels like a theme, right? So maybe anything else feel like it's themey? Is there a theme around a loss of community? Yeah, Dee.
Since we have a minute, I just want to
Sure.
reinforce what Sam said as well. I think that like we can get focused sometimes on like it can feel like a chessboard, you're moving these pieces around. But then it can also feel like this like emotional morass that we're stuck in where you can't move anyone around because it's hurtful to everybody. And I feel like just some focus on the program pieces of it. I think that if we take ourselves out of our like community representative hat and put on sort of like our SEGC hat, like we're here to create something that, maybe has never been seen in PPS, which is like a thoughtful path moving forward that sets all of our programs up for success without necessarily diminishing any particular program. And it just feels hard to get there. And so I think a little firmer guidance from PPS about like, okay, this is what works best for, like CSS, like this is the program. When we made the program, we said this is why we made it a separate program. Same thing for DLIs, same thing for neighborhood programs, like just some real focus. And like we hear so much about like, well, this is what's happening in my school and it's special because we've carved out this thing. And I think the whole point of equity is that nobody should have to carve anything out. You should be able to show up for school and show up and get the best, just get the best outcome without having to go to all this extra effort to move and find a house in a certain place or find certain things. And it would just be nice to have a firmer hand from like our facilitators around just staying focused on the fact that we're here to make like lasting program changes that are beyond our own kids. This should be for kids that haven't even started kindergarten yet.
Yeah. So I know Elizabeth and Sheila to a certain extent. I think you've been in listening mode, but anything else, anything new you want to bring into the room? We've been focusing primarily on processing the feedback we've heard in the open house, in the focus groups, and what is missing, what are some themes that are emerging or continuing to emerge. Do you want to bring any of that into the room? Not to put you on the spot. You don't have to. Just want to give you an opportunity, and you can certainly catch up. Just raise your hand if you want to catch up to us. Yeah, Elizabeth. You're on mute. There you go.
If you can't hear me, my computer's been, yeah, yay. I guess I have a question about the feedback. Is it going to be summarized? I went through and I looked at it, and it was just a lot of kind of undifferentiated data. The Spanish language was not translated, and I don't know if there was a translation of it.
I believe there is a translation, yeah, but I don't know if that's
okay.
in the folder. But yeah, so I think one of the things that we talked about before we came into the breakout rooms, Elizabeth, was that we wanted the SEGC to do the at least the first part of the summarizing, right? We didn't want that to be something that was we wanted it to be as raw as possible, so that way you could work with the data rather than trying to synopsize it too much and potentially misunderstand or create some non-authentic processing of that data. So that's why we're doing this first to bring that in. Chris, any questions, anything further? Elizabeth?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, Chris, you got your hand up.
I just have one hesitation with the idea of going through that raw data, those, I don't know, 400 some comments, and summarizing them. Is that there were so many that were, I mean, it was so much I want, and there was so much, those things kind of canceled each other out. So to me, yeah, exactly. So my concern about that is that if we just look at the number of people that said, here's what I want for me, which is what most of the comments were about, and some of them were as broad as, here's what I want from my community, but I don't think I saw any comments, or maybe just a couple, that were, okay, this is a big puzzle, and there are some, we are doing it because some students need to be treated differently than they are now. So I don't know, I'm questioning, I don't want to put a lot of work into giving the numerical power would all be on the side of don't do anything.
Yeah, I don't think the interest is to have you all process the stats, right? I think the processing is what we're doing right now, which is what were the key themes that are emerging from community, and where do we want to go with that, right? Where is that leading us? And so I think that's what we're seeing. That's what we're hearing, is that it sounds like a very clear, we want some stronger direction from Portland Public Schools, and a concern that it isn't just about, we don't want change so much, but we're concerned about community and program integrity. That seemed like a theme.
Hey, Karina, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just realized the way that I have my hand, you won't be able to see me.
Oh, yes, I can see you.
In searching for solutions, I think the one thing I hope we also do is to try to keep some flexibility, knowing that every school community is different, and every family and every child is different.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen anew for you all. You should be seeing it now. And I'm going to be sure I can get my participants up so I can see if anyone's raising their hand. Okay, so I will start by just reviewing. Can you all see my screen? Can I get a thumbs up? Yeah, okay. So just reviewing the proposals specific to Spanish immersion. So in draft proposal A, again, the focus here is on trying to align whole school DLI models with locations closest to where native speaking students reside. So in this case, we create a whole school lottery DLI program at Lent. So the Atkinson and Bridger programs move to Lent, and the boundary dissolves to create a whole school lottery. Draft B is really focused on a whole school model that tries to keep DLI students closest to where they currently are, to their existing locations. So this would create a whole school neighborhood model at Lent. So it feeds into Kellogg, the Kellogg DLI program at the middle school. And Bridger also becomes a whole school lottery. So the Atkinson program moves to Bridger, and it feeds into Harrison Park. So that's what's in draft proposal B. And draft proposal C is even though the district acknowledges that from an educational standpoint, they don't prefer single or co-location, that this is a proposal that was sort of requested by the SEGC to allow for continued co-location. And so the Spanish DLI program at Lent would be co-located with the neighborhood school, and it grows by adding a strand from Bridger, which would again continue to feed to Harrison Park. And Atkinson would also be co-located with a neighborhood school that also grows a strand from Bridger to try and get to multiple strand. And that one would feed into Kellogg. So those are the three proposals for the most part. Does anyone have any questions about the proposals? Anything you want to clarify before we start to take that straw poll?
Yeah, Karina, I'm wondering if you can clarify. I've been a little lost in the numbers. Does Bridger have the capacity to host 3 strands?
All right, so let's, Miss Judy.
Are you talking at Kellogg? Oh, Bridger, sorry, I thought you said Bridger.
Just at Bridger, yeah.
So I'm gonna zoom in here. Bridger currently has 19 classrooms, doesn't include the 4 portable classrooms. So I believe, if I'm not incorrect, I believe, Judy, that in order to go to the 3 strands, we would need to include modulars. Is that correct?
So why don't you go ahead and flip to the other page?
This one?
Yeah. Okay, so the question that you asked, I think is, would be like number 2, is that right? So could it be a 3-strand? If it was a 3-strand dual language immersion, 3 strands per grade level, you would need 18 regular classrooms plus a minimum of 3 support elective rooms for a total of 21. Bridger has 19. So yes, we would need one of the modular, the two modular classrooms would be needed to achieve that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good question. Okay.
Thanks for letting us model using the.
Yes, exactly. The data we have, exactly. And hopefully you all still have the Miro link. So if you want to look at those, and if you don't, or if you can't get into them, then by all means, just ask me and I'll pull us back down there. So what we'd like to do now is if we can take a straw poll, we're going to start with proposal A, right? So on a scale from, I'm just going to say from 1 to 5, 1 being this is the worst idea ever, perhaps that's too strong, but I'm strongly opposed to this proposal, to 5 being this is a great proposal, I like everything about it, right? So can you all, again, SEGC members and principal representatives, can you enter into the chat where you personally are as you sort of represent your neighborhood community? From 1 to 5, this is our straw poll. So will you put that into the chat for us to get started, please?
Sorry, and this is just for A.
Just for proposal A, correct.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and
Whole school DLI at Lent, all Spanish DLI, middle schoolers going to Harrison Park.
Correct. Okay. Okay. Right, I think that's everybody in the room. So we've got a pretty good range. And I think D hit as 5 coming in, kind of hit it on both sides. So we're between a 2 and a 3 here. So some strong ones of, no, this isn't great. Really only 1, 4, 5, and some 2s and 3s. Okay. Averaging 5 for whole school DLI at Lent and 1 for the DLI moving from Kellogg to Harrison Park. Fair enough, D. Okay, so that gives us a good starting point. So now I'm going to move us to, and Judy, would you mind keeping a record of that?
Yes, I've got a little grid.
A little grid, I like it.
Unless Jed's got something that grids well on a Post-it note.
There you go. Yeah, okay. So proposal B, again, whole school model. And we have a whole school neighborhood model at Lent, which moves to Kellogg, and a whole school lottery program at Bridger, which moves to Harrison Park. Where are you on this one? So again, from 1 being don't like it to 5 being, yep, I think that's right. Where are you? Okay. So I'm going to say we have 1, 1, a good number of 3s and 4s and a couple of 2s. So this one I would say would be an average of 3, 4. Just fun. I'm doing some loose math here. Okay. Good straw poll. Okay. Draft proposal C. Which again, Harrison Park Middle School, well, Lent program is co-located with the neighborhood school. So we have 2 programs, 1 at Lent, 1 at Atkinson, and they each pull from Bridger. Okay, so now we're voting on C. So one strand each from Bridger, 1 goes to Lent, 1 goes to Atkinson. The Lent program feeds into Harrison Park, and the Atkinson program feeds into Kellogg. Okay. 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 Okay, I'm trying to process here. Oscar, what was your first comment? Okay, would be a 5. So some strong 4s and 5s, but then a few folks that are on the opposite extreme end, 1s and 2s. And some of that is about kind of the splitting, right? There's intent to kind of split those DLI programs. And then where another key component of that is where they matriculate to, I think was a key piece. So this one, I don't know. There's a lot of 5s, some 4s and 5s. So this one's probably somewhere between, and there's another 4. So I'm going to say this one is more on the 4 side, a strong 4, maybe a 3.7.
I would go so far as to say this is the most popular.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So
because there's, so if I were to summarize back to A, there were 5 people who voted at a 1 or a 2. For B, there were 3 people who voted as a 1 or a 2, and for C, it was 2 people.
Right.
So it's the C proposal seems to be a place where people had the least amount that they just couldn't live with.
Right. And I would completely agree with you, Sam. This is in no way statistical. This is in no way scientific. That's why we specifically wanted to put it as a straw poll. But we thought it would be a good way to at least gauge where we are, gauge where, where potentially there could be a starting point, and then also to see if there are specific tensions that we want to start to have you all talk to, right? So that's really, do we have, I guess what I want to hear from, if we're saying the one that has the strongest votes and the least low votes for proposal C, I want to hear from folks who don't agree with that, right? That want to push against that. So that way we can kind of see where that comes from. So maybe raise your hand. Harmony.
I like the idea of C. I think the idea is right in terms of like responding to feedback about desiring co-located programs, but it doesn't look feasible. Like Atkinson only has 25 classrooms. You need 27 minimum. So, and there are 2 ISC classrooms at Atkinson too, which means you'd need 29. So it feels like a non-starter for me. Like I love the idea of it, but it doesn't fit. So I like the idea. I think it responds to the desires of our community to stay co-located. I think, I think there are good pieces to it. It doesn't work. So I don't know what to, it feels like, well, why are we talking about this?
Okay. Jed or Judy, do you want to address some of the classroom? Do we want to go down to the classroom? I think that is not a faulty analysis, but I want to be sure that does anyone have any? I mean, there are obviously ways to get it to 27. But.
Yeah. So yesterday in a message last evening, Megan shared with you all an analysis that from Flo on the question of capacity at Atkinson. So Jed, I know you're also taking notes, but I don't know if you want to address it. I'll just generally say that the flow model uses student stations. And if you're just looking at student stations, there's enough capacity at Atkinson to support all the kids the way the plan described. But using the section-based analysis or the classroom-based analysis, clearly there's a big flaw. So maybe the question for the team is like, is that a flaw that's worth trying to is that the biggest thing that would need to be fixed for this? Or is it reason to sort of are there still strengths in C that could be managed in a different way?
Judy, would you, there we go. Somebody just answered it. So what student station was, there was a question about what student station meant. That's the number of classroom seats.
Right. So in the flow model, there's a number of student seats in every school. And when you add up all the students at Atkinson and in the neighborhood program and in the immersion program, it adds up to be less than the total. The problem is they can't all be, as you all know, right? They can't all be in the same classrooms at a grade level. They need to be learning in the different languages. So that's where it has to be reality checked against the classroom capacity.
Okay. So that's a question, right? Does Atkinson have enough room, and can this be mitigated? Okay. Dee, I see you putting a number of things in the chat, so I want to have you voice those into the room so we're not trying to have 2 conversations here. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking.
This just goes back to some of the feedback that I had in the first breakout session, which is, it feels like to me, without the guidance of the district and sort of like strongly prioritizing the needs of the programs, this is a lot of school communities who are looking at C and thinking, great, that doesn't really affect us. We don't move. It doesn't really, it's another school. And in which our case, it happens to be Bridger, which is our school. And again, it's not the question of the change, it's the question of the purpose of the change. If the point here is to create and develop program integrity with the DLI programs, this does not feel like it does that. This just feels like a compromise plan that minimizes change to higher SES neighborhoods and doesn't actually do anything to elevate the DLI programs in a way that they could be elevated in this process. So it's hard because it's like, I'd love to know if you took the non-impacted schools out of it and talked about these same issues, what the feedback would be like if people weren't sort of choosing based on how it affected their own communities.
Adriel?
So I hear you, Dee. I know we've been in the same group for a while, and so it makes sense what you're saying. But I guess my question to you would be, what would be a compromise then? So if we're looking at integrity, but we also want to increase enrollment, what would be either a happy compromise or a viable solution here, in your opinion, right? I know it's hard to think of, but could we make 5 work?
I think a viable, I think a viable compromise would just be anything that centers what we've been talking about the purpose of the DLI programs and how you support those. And I feel like if the district is saying, and research is saying, and our families are saying that a whole community and a whole school model supports them the best, abandoning that just for the comfort of higher SES schools to me just doesn't feel right. And it doesn't feel like that's what this process is supposed to be about. But if there was a compromise with split strands, it's still hard to understand why split strands are continue to be included when all the research is sort of like, it feels, there's something really dishonest to me about the process when everybody, like all the experts and the directors, are saying split strands are not in the best interests of emerging language learners, why we are centering the voices of privileged families and making the decision that split strands are just more comfortable for everybody. I find that to just not be in the spirit of what we're trying to do. But if split strands are the way it's supposed to happen, then I think we look at where do they best serve emerging language learners. And, Atkinson and Bridger, more and more so in recent years, we really struggle to get like authentic language learners into our program. And I've heard feedback that is like, oh, the district just needs to do a better job of recruiting those speakers into these programs. And I think the point of sort of the equity lens is that, is it anybody's job to recruit people into a neighborhood that's not their own? If Lentz has people trying to apply for a program that doesn't have the staffing to support that program because those programs are being supported in neighborhoods where there are not native speakers, it just feels really disingenuous to be talking about equity. And so to me, the program, if they're going to be split strands, the programs need to move to where they need to places that make more sense. So, Arleta has space. It seems like a good option. It's not sort of in the heat map the way that Lentz is, but it's a community that has space in the school. It's a little bit more central to Southeast Spanish learners. So it's the right direction for the location as a co-location, I feel like, versus Atkinson, it just feels like a better fit to the equity lens. So I think there's compromises. If we're going to truly use the equity lens, I think there's compromises there, but it doesn't feel like we're making compromises based on programming and equity. It feels like we're making compromises based on families feeling entitled to retain the programs that they feel like they're entitled to.
So that was what I think I was getting at, the Arleta part. Could we look at Arleta versus Atkinson?
Yeah. Not just Arleta, Adriel. I think our overall consensus from our community was that, we put a lot of time and effort and blood and sweat and tears to build this DLI program into this community. And if we're not serving the community it's serving, we want to shepherd it into a location where there's still a strong, there's a strong native speaking population that is also low SES that will be served better from this. And so I think moving it closer in does not, it seems like the opposite direction, like moving it to a high SES school seems like the opposite direction than what the program is intended to do. And so,
yeah, hold on, ladies. I want to allow some other hands are up. So maybe Adriel, finish your thought, and then I'm going to go to Sheila and Sandra.
I mean, I think that was the solution portion of
That
it.
you were trying to get out.
Yeah, because I definitely get where you're coming from. And I think, there's the other side of it, regardless of SES, that people are feeling concerned. And I think you were in the conversation that I was in about whole school potentially being a bigger target for those communities in terms of crimes or feeling alienated and things like that. So there are definitely two sides of that coin. But from a middle perspective, if this was an option, the Arleta versus Atkins or somewhere else closer in where it's still serving a robust community, that was what I was
trying to get at.
Yes.
Okay.
But thank you, Dee.
All right, Sheila.
Okay, thank you. I want to start by saying that I think it's really complex. So I'm glad that we're taking the time to to dive into this a bit, because I think that one of the things that I've seen happen a lot during the course of kind of our work as a guiding coalition is kind of looking for one answer that fits like all schools, all communities, all families. And I think that one of the things that I've really struggled with is the fact that those answers might be different for different communities. They might be different for different schools and even for different families. And so I think that I would say that, what we've seen at Atkinson is that we've really highly focused on our emergent bilinguals and on speaking with, our Latinx families, on our Spanish dominant families throughout all of our work, so that when we were bringing forward from a DLI perspective, when we were bringing forward kind of our recommendations or what we were requesting, that it really was rooted within the voices of the communities that these programs were developed to serve. And I can't speak at all for Bridger, and I can't speak at all for Lent, because that's not my community. Those aren't the conversations that I've been a part of. And I also don't want to say that what our community has said they're looking for would be the right for all other communities either. So again, it's just complex. What we have heard is that, and what our data shows us, so what we've heard is that families are happy at Atkinson. They like the more centralized location. They like being co-located. They feel safe there. They feel like they're a part of a whole school community, both of DLI and that. I'm not to say that that couldn't also happen at Arleta, not to say that couldn't also happen at Bridger, and not to say that that couldn't also happen in another location. I'm just saying that having that kind of choice of being in a more central location has been important for many of our families. Many of our families have chosen to move closer so they can be there. Two pieces of data just to bring up is that when you look at kind of where native Spanish speakers want to go and where they've been trying to enroll in, Atkinson for many years has had some of the highest numbers of families trying to get into that DLI program. I would like to see that at all of our language immersion programs. I know there's a lot of reasons why that is true, but I do just want to say that it is a program that continues to be very strong within the native Spanish speaking community. And the last thing I would say, and Harmony can probably speak to this more than I can, but we also are seeing that within our ELL students at Atkinson, both in neighborhood, I believe, as well as in DLI, they're doing really well. So when we look at kind of their test scores and how they're doing in this specific school, they're doing okay. Again, I don't know how that's transferable, but I want to just step back from saying that that the whole school model is right for all families, and that I just want to be careful about kind of making this or that, either this or that kind of approach to this work, and maintain kind of that level of understanding that, we're here to learn from each other, and we're here to kind of to try to massage and find something that can work for as many families as possible.
Thank you, Sheila. Sandra.
Just super quick, backing it up here to Dee and Adriel's comments for the benefit of, I guess, probably some Bridger families and some Arleta families, and maybe even some of our coalition members that might watch this video later. I just ask you, Dee to expound on the Arleta Bridger DLI proposal here you're sort of outlining? Because I've heard about it just through PTA channels, but I'm assuming that the rest of the coalition and people who are going to watch this haven't.
Could I wait and maybe let the other people with their hands up?
Yeah, we will definitely get to that.
Okay, so, well, I guess I yield my time then.
Sorry, Sandra, we'll get there, I promise. I just want to be sure we're getting other comments as well before we go back to that same conversation we had. So Oscar, anything from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to question, I don't know, the co-chair was mentioning like, what's the middle ground? How can we like make this work and things like that? And I don't know why we need to compromise on equity, meaning that the Cheryl Proctor already mentioned, you know, the benefits and like closing the achievement gap. And we haven't had that in the Southeast, right? And for the schools that are doing great, that's awesome. They're going to do even better with a full immersion program. And just because we haven't seen it, the data's there. And when we talk to our in our DLI, in our Bridger meeting, and we talked to the 3 of the 7 board members, they defaulted to the professionals. They said, you know, they're the ones that know what's going on and stuff, and we'll default to them, is what I think I heard. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody that was in that meeting. So we know where they're leaning. And for us to, I think Dee mentioned it, it feels disingenuous, you know, to go down this route when we clearly know what some of the board members are doing. And also, we created guardrails initially, and this was one of them, to be full immersion. Then, for some reason, we changed it and we came up with a C, right? Now that we have more information, can we go back to our original guardrails? Now that we know what the professionals, what the people are saying to close the achievement gap, regardless of the neighborhoods, right? What they're saying in their co-located programs, they love it, they're great. And it's gonna be even better once we have a full immersion program. Doesn't matter, and I think somebody mentioned too, it doesn't really matter where. My biggest thing is, how do we get all the DLI kids to Kellogg? I think Mr. Richards Smith said something about it. Like, the program's there, it's ready to go. And how can we, and that's my biggest thing. Like, I know change is gonna happen. I feel like PPS is gonna do the right thing. The board is gonna do the right thing. Because they do a great job of, you know, every presentation that's out there, there's brown and black kids on display, you know. But now when we have some actions, some real actions to take, I hope that they do the right thing. And so I'm past elementary. I feel like that's going to happen. Now, how do we get to the kids to Kellogg? Thank you.
Harmony?
So a general comment about, I think in general, we've talked about the challenges around multiple DLI programs at middle school, multiple types of DLI programs at a single middle school. And I think that that's certainly an issue that needs to be solved kind of across the board, right? To really make sure that kids have, that the goals of the K-8, K-5 are really achieved, right? To have a robust middle school experience, having multiple DLI programs creates schedule, right, compression, and so kids can't have that. And just a second question or point, I think while I've heard talk of the achievement data and issues around whole school DLI, I don't feel like I've seen it. I've seen a rationale document, I've seen a little bit of research, nothing in Portland. So we continue to ask for it. Claire said it's coming. I will say that I've looked at the ODE data, and it's very different across all the schools. I'm happy to put a link in the chat, but at least at a minimum, at Atkinson, there's evidence over multiple years of that there's the achievement gap is being closed for emergent bilinguals and for Latinx students, and for economically disadvantaged students, which is how ODE breaks up those subgroups. And so I think when we talk about how best to center the needs of our most vulnerable populations, we're trying to see like where it's not working and where it is working, because it is different depending on the schools. And so broad statements about whole school DLI will solve all of our problems. There are different problems at different schools and different issues. And there are places where it's working, and that you're seeing different successes in different ways. So I just hope that we can, I would like to drill more into that data. I hear that coming from the district, but I also hear our community saying they feel marginalized and they feel like a push to whole school DLI feels dangerous or unsafe because of a feeling of segregation. And I think we've been trying to like understand both perspectives and try and find a space for that. And again, I'm open to suggestions, the Arleta option for co-location, or if Atkinson could be made to work with 4 strands, however that looks. But you know, there's a lot of different nuances here, and I'm hopeful we can work to like not shut each other down a little bit. I'm feeling a little bit more negativity in tonight, and I know it's not intentional, but I'm hopeful we can try and keep open minds with each other about where we're coming from and what our communities are saying and how we're trying to reflect that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Harmony. I mean, I think that's part of the challenge here, right? Is we're starting to narrow down, which means part of the way that you narrow down is you try and figure out what are the two sides, and that can seem a little bit more contentious. I don't think that's the intention, but I think that's what we're trying to do is kind of what are the two sides and how do we bring them closer to center? Adriel, I think you were the next one with your hand up.
So I just want to be clear, because like I said, Dee, I definitely heard what you're saying, and Oscar, I hear you. And I think Harmony hit the nail on the head for me. The feeling of the segregation and the potential for that is my thought here in terms of whether or not we can figure out a middle ground. I am definitely not, and I hope you did not get from my comment that I'm interested in compromising equity. Because I know all too well what type of challenges come in these spaces for people of color, specifically African-American kids, being one from Portland Public Schools myself. So I don't want to at all give that impression. My goal here is to see if there is a way to come up with solutions that would help meet as many sides of the table as is possible. And if it's not, then it's not, then we need to move on.
Right.
The goal isn't to force anything, it's to look at it from as many angles as we can to determine how to best serve everybody. And then if this is not the solution, then we kick it back to one of the other ones. But in no way I don't think any of us want to compromise on equity. We just want to make sure that if we discredit an option, that we've looked at it from every angle and we know to trash it without looking back at it.
Thank you, Adriel. Elizabeth, you haven't had a chance to get your voice in the room tonight, so let me do that, and then I'll come back to you, Dee.
Thank you. And as somebody who has, I don't have a direct impact in any of these programs, so I appreciate how honest and transparent everybody's being. And what I'm wondering is, everybody has very compelling articulations about, what works for them, what's not going to work, pros and cons for different scenarios. And for me, I think the additional piece of information would be, I heard what PPS said about whole school DLIs, and I tend to go that way because that is what PPS said, but then you bring in the on the ground impacts. And I'm wondering, for me, more information about the pros and cons of the different scenarios from PPS's perspective. Like I'm looking for, and maybe it doesn't exist, the objective analysis that's going to be the silver bullet that's going to direct us all to exactly the right answer. But okay, so, but really, there's so much rich information coming from families and students about what they've built within their communities and what's going on in these areas. I am craving also a little bit more, what are the pros and cons from an educator standpoint about these scenarios?
Would there be value in, for you all, me opening up the enrollment data on our screen, or can everyone pull that up on your own? Do you need that?
No, I think for me, it'd be better if we could talk just bigger pictures and not get down into the numbers, because I think that's what we've been doing and getting. So I think bigger picture things is what I'd like to keep the focus on, and not
kind of where we're going. Yeah. Okay. D.
So I really, Sheila, thank you. I appreciate what you said about your community, because it just sort of made me realize that we've been talking kind of more in theory and sort of not about community things. And like I think to the single strand programs, this whole school DLI feels like a theory. It's like, oh, it's supposed to be good, but how do we know? That's not been our experience. But I think at Bridger, like with 2 strands in a school and a neighborhood strand that oftentimes is, in the teens in terms of classes, we do function in a lot of ways like a whole school DLI. And we serve a significantly lower SES population and higher BIPOC population. I think we're the second most diverse behind Harrison Park in our cluster. And so just what that means in like reality to student outcomes, and we're talking about like the most vulnerable student outcomes, not sort of like kids that are starting with high scores, is that, like my son is trilingual and has a speech delay and developmental delays. And to be in a school where he can still honor his culture and get supports for language and behavior natively in Spanish, like that's a huge deal. And for families who are can't pay for these resources, like can't pay for Spanish speaking speech pathologists. And, we have a counselor our counselor is a native speaker. Our front office they're native speakers. Our gym teacher was a fluent speaker. Our speech pathologist was a fluent speaker, and our behavioral support, she was a native speaker. And so just the impact in student outcomes for low SES families, like we've just seen it in our time there. And my 7 years at Bridger, it's the supports that go to the families that need it. It's just undeniable. And so I think that when you're talking about immigrant populations and BIPOC populations, there's I'm a first generation sort of poor immigrant to start off with. And there's these levels of concern that you get to have when you're poor and an immigrant and trying to sort of figure things out, where test scores, they can't even be on your radar because you're trying to deal with food and you're trying to deal with just day-to-day functioning in a district. And, as a school that was a Title I school up until 2 years ago, all of these supports were a huge deal for us. And it feels like we're just such a different community. It's a different playing field. We're starting in a totally different playing field. We don't have parents that are worried about test scores, and we're worried about transportation. We're worried about safety. We consistently in the Bridger neighborhood have Proud Boys driving around, and we have sort of this alert network. And so for us, it's really, it's about community. It's about support, and it's about trying to start from a 1 and trying to get up to a 4 or 5. So if you Google Bridger and look at test scores, no, we're not a 7 or 8 or a 9. But we've gone from a 1 to a 5 in the course of the last 10 years. And it's a lot of work for the community to get there. And so I think in some ways, that's why Arleta feels like that part of Southeast feels like a better fit from an SES standpoint, because for our native speakers to be thrown into a high SES school without not just the supports, it's the attitude of fellow parents. You go from having a kid who's the bad kid in class and he's loud or whatever. And a lot of those are cultural stereotypes. And when you're in a school that can really nurture those kids from a young grade, and they're not othered, and you don't have parents who are oh gosh, you've got the bad kid in your class, there's just true support from these kids from kindergarten up until the time that they go. And so it's transformative to see where these kids are and how much the achievement gap has been bridged just between kindergarten and middle school. And so I think that's why like our community feels so passionate about Kellogg as a middle school, because we have this whole community of teachers and just the numbers, and then the support staff in the front office, and with the number of native and fluent speakers in that school, it's this consistency with the program that's really been like life or death for our families. And so we just want to see that persist in the areas that it's going to be the most impactful. And so that's coming from our experience. And Sheila, I totally understand you guys have a different experience. Like the way that your community makeup is really different. And it is important to distinguish like why our support of whole school DLI is sort of based on us sort of having had a whole school DLI in a lot of respects up until now. And so it's not just based on the theory, it's based on the practice and based on the concerns of our families of what happens if we get split up. Like where is the one native speaking speech pathologist going to go, and where is the one native speaking gym teacher going to go? Like that's really, those were like the hard, like heartfelt concerns from our community, was like very specific about that teacher. Like where's that teacher going? Where's that counselor going? How can I make sure that I end up in the same space because my child has a relationship with them? That's been really important. So it's not success, it's survival for a lot of these kids. And so I just think that we're, you know, I wish that we could hear more from Lentz about sort of where they are with their program and what the programming feels like to them. But so that's just like where we're coming from with the whole school DLI, is we just don't want to lose the support network that we already have in place that's so important for our most vulnerable families. And we feel like our non-native speaking DLI families, we sort of like agree that we have the resources to make up those achievement gaps. And so we just want to make sure that our discussion and our movement is really focused on the families that our program is meant to serve.
Thank you. We just want to note that we added 10 minutes because I think we're in a key conversation point here, right? Lisa.
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to go off what Dee said because I am an advocate, and like we have to, like, I know what I'm new to the area, and I think about the children, and when you move everyone everywhere and you're splitting them up, like people have to think about what that does to the children and the families and the people supporting them. And so that's a big thing to think about, like how the kids are gonna feel, because that's where we start with is our youth. So I really agreed with that part. So I just had to put that in there.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and so parts, I'm coming, Adrielle, but part of, I think, what I really like that you were able to articulate, Dee, is that it is those support services, right? So as one of the things that we talked about early on was, at some point, we're going to get to what are some, I'm going to say mitigation strategies, right? And could one of those mitigation strategies be ensuring that those supports that you were currently seeing at Bridger from native speakers at all of those levels, whether it be counseling or resource or whatever it is, that those are provided regardless of where the children go, knowing that the relationships are not going to be the same, but at least the trust that comes from somebody speaking your language, is that something that could be mitigated?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the question though is that we just don't, I guess I think the district really struggles to find enough
for sure
speaking people in those positions.
Course.
And
just full stop. Yeah.
Full stop. So it's like, it's just, we don't want
to. Easier said than done.
Yeah, exactly. And sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Adrielle, go ahead, because I think, no, don't get us.
No, we're leaving. I'm going to hold it. Are we coming back?
I think we're supposed to come back.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm
sorry, y'all. Yeah, Adrielle, you're up.
No, so when we are talking about, we're talking a lot about the dual language, obviously, because that's where we're at. But then I think about the neighborhood kids that are African-American who do not have a teacher or an administrator that look like them, that are lost in between, feeling alienated because, like Dee said, you are, a loud kid and you are hyper or whatever seeming when you're just not really being recognized. And so
right,
I'm going to step into myself as a parent for just a moment and say that I've had to experience that with a child who's talented and gifted, that it wasn't recognized by the people he was around because they weren't trained to look for his behavior as boredom versus ADHD or whatever. And so I just, when I say I'm looking for a
Middle ground. Mhm.
yeah, a middle ground, it's because if it's an all school DLI, fine, he just might not go there. But if it's my neighborhood school and he has a friend down the street who is Hispanic or Russian or whatever the situation is, and he wants to stay in that space, how do I get him in a space where he feels like he's being nurtured? And so that issue from the language perspective is true for, non-language BIPOC students, maybe Polynesian, African-American, Hawaiian, whatever. And so I just want to be clear that I'm looking for equity for people who don't speak a different language, who are still marginalized and miscared for. And they're not generally at this table right now, right? So
well, I mean, those are the communities that we're trying to center, but from who we haven't heard. Right.
I mean, and the reason, could possibly be because none of these changes appear to be changes that are going to impact the experience that their child has in that space. Right. And so why come and talk about changes? My kid is still going to be looked at from a teacher like he's rebellious and unruly, because not only does he not have anyone who looks like him at that school, but there's nobody advocating for him at that space as well. Especially in a space where there's no neighborhood option. So just a thought. Again, I'm not advocating for it to be 3 or for it to not be 3. I just want to make sure we're looking at every angle before we scrap it.
All right. Okay. Whew, that's a lot. Okay, so I want to try and get us to because we're going to go in 5 minutes, and again, knowing that we have to accept non-closure, but I want to get us back to, like, are we putting enough out on the table? If we're saying C is a starting point, which I'm not sure we're there yet, so maybe, actually, you know what, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say straw poll. Now, given the conversations we've had about C as a starting point, 1 to 5, how strongly do you believe that this is our starting point? 5 being, yep, there's still a lot we have to deal with, but I think it's a good starting point. And 1 being, nope, I think we got to move away from C and start looking at A or B. Okay. So in the chat. Okay. Again, primarily 4s. Oscar, you were, not to call you out, but I want to understand, is there a component of this? Because I think you were stronger in the first round of C, in support of C. Is there a component of this that, is it the Kellogg piece? Kind of talk to me a little bit about where you're coming from, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is 2 parts, right? Kellogg for me is the number 1. Middle schools, name me a middle school that's doing well at PPS right now. There's just not that many, right? I feel like from the conversations that I've had with my son, that he loves Kellogg. It seems like it's fitting him really well. The community, the people that he that transferred over from, like, the educators that moved over from Bridger over to Kellogg, so all of that. And I have a 4th grader for my DLI Bridger program. So yes, I'm advocating for him, but I'm also advocating for the people that are not here. I'm privileged enough to send my kid to Lent, send him to Arleta, send him to whoever, like, I'll do that. It is that important for me to do that. I'm not one of these parents that are going to say, oh, if it goes to here, then I'm out, like, I'm all in. So, and what all in means for me is that we do what's best for these kids, not just my kid, but all the kids that are in the DLI program. And focusing, again, the equity lens, focusing on the emergent bilinguals that this program is for. This isn't a enrichment program that we have here. the Spanish one, right?
Yeah, right.
And
Social.
PPS just needs to do a better job of marketing that, right? Like, how can we say this is what's best for them, but we're gonna maybe do this, maybe do that. Like, this is what we're doing here. So that's where the one comes in.
Okay, and I'm seeing from D kind of a similar concept, so I want to be sure I capture it. So if we're staying with C, if there is a way in which Kellogg becomes an all Spanish DLI rather than kind of the double DLI strand, that would be that would achieve higher support for both you, Oscar, and for D, correct? Okay. Anyone else? Anything? We've got probably a couple of minutes before we got to go. Is there another piece? Elizabeth, you were wanting to. It looks like we have strong support for C as a beginning point, and with with the folks. Dang, so close. I had you, Elizabeth. But I think this is a good place to continue the conversations. Thank you, everybody.